Welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you guys here, and we're even more excited to have Matt Miller kick us off today. This is going to be the launch of a lot of future trainings coming virtually and some face-to-face, so be sure that you check out our summer learning news on the SSISD webpage. The launch of a lot of future trainings coming virtually and some face-to-face, so be sure that you check out our summer learning news on the SSISD webpage. The launch of a lot of Sorry, we've got a little bit of feedback here in our office, but anyway, we want to get started with Matt Miller. Matt he's taught in public schools for more than 10 years, teaching at all levels of high school Spanish. In his career, he planned nearly 12,000 class lessons. He taught more than 500,000 instructional minutes, and he graded work nearly 2,000 days of class. His blog, Ditch That Textbook, and 4 books have equipped and inspired tens of thousands of educators in more than 100 countries. He lives in West Central Indiana, and he says that he's living the dream, happily married with 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a mortgage. Before I kick it off to Matt, I just want to say, Matt is one of the most genuine people that I've met in all of our education stuff, and I cannot wait for you guys to get to hear more about him. After this keynote session, he will do 2 more sessions for us. All of those can be found on that same page. Just keep scrolling down, and when it starts, it'll go live just like this one did. Look forward to your feedback afterwards. We'll put a feedback button at the bottom of his page as soon as he's done with this last session that you can fill out. If you want to ask him any questions, we'll get those to him or anything else, but you can also use the comment area for his follow-up sessions to make sure that you can communicate directly with him. During this one, we won't have as much of that communication. Thanks a lot, and Matt, it's all up to you now, but please welcome Matt Miller.
All right, thanks, John. I appreciate it. Hey, everyone. When I was a beginning teacher, I thought I knew a lot about teaching until the moment that I saw my students tripping over each other in a rush to get out of my classroom. It was 2006. Imagine a junior, senior high school, brick, fairly nondescript, with a US highway running in front of it, an elementary school to one side, and on the other 2 sides, cornfields. Yeah, it was a small school, like graduating class of 32 small, like way to drive your tractor to school day small. Are you starting to get the picture? In fact, if you're watching this live, go ahead and comment in the chat and let me know if you're one of those small school people or if you came from a small school. Now, when you come into the Spanish classroom, you would see a teacher who's tallish, handsome, follically challenged, yet optimistic. Can you guess who I'm talking about? And in my Spanish 2 class that day, I am giving a riveting lecture on reflexive verbs with verb conjugation charts and the theory behind their use. Riveting, right? And when I was done, I very graciously gave my students 5 minutes to work on their homework. Now, this may surprise you, but my students weren't exactly excited about working on that homework assignment. Let's just say they weren't reflecting on reflexive verbs. I'd totally lost their interest. So I walked to the front of the room and I go, so you're not working on your homework, huh? That must mean I didn't give you enough and I need to give you some more. If they didn't despise me before, then they totally loathed me then. The bell rang and those students sprinted for the door. I've never seen students sprint for the door before, but there they were, pushing and bumping into tables. I stood in that empty, quiet classroom all by myself, and I thought, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what they signed up for. This isn't what teaching and learning is supposed to be about. Now, have you ever had a moment like that before, where the traditional way of teaching just wasn't getting the job done and you're ready for a change? If you've ever had a moment like that before, see, when I'm in person with a group, I ask them to say yes. So in this case, I'm going to ask you, if you've ever had a moment like that before, type yes. So 1 year later, I'm standing in the same classroom, and I'm teaching the same way, but the difference was that I was unsettled about it. I'm standing at the podium, going over practice questions at the end of the chapter with my students as a whole group, and I looked up at them. I saw the same slumped posture as the kids the year before, the same disconnect, and that same look in their eyes. I don't want to be here. I flash back to the year before, punishing those students with that dreadful lecture and then assigning them extra homework. And then watching them run for the door, trying to get away from my lesson and from me as fast as they could. And then I flashed back to the present and I thought, oh my goodness, if this doesn't get any better, these guys are going to run for the door. I'm no different than I was a year ago. I mean, they're not learning any better and they hate my class just as much. I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this. And before I could stop myself, I heard myself say, everybody grab your textbooks. There was an audible groan as I walked to the back of the room to these 7-foot-tall wooden cabinets. And I said, your textbooks go in here. So here come the students. Grab their textbooks, shuffling along, giving me the side eye, as if to say, are we in trouble? But the truth was that I was in trouble because I had let my textbooks become a crutch. And I would lean on that crutch whenever I was unsure of myself, if I was uncomfortable, or if I just didn't have enough time. And I knew if I didn't quit my textbook soon, I was going to miss out on this great opportunity to have impact on my students. My students wouldn't live up to their potential. I wouldn't live up to my potential. I wanted to believe. No, I knew that as teachers, we are more than the table of contents of our textbooks. We are more than the table of contents of our textbooks. We are too multi-skilled, multi-talented, multi-awesome to just march chapter by chapter through a textbook, assign some questions at the end, and then give students a worksheet or a workbook page. What would it look like if I ditched my textbooks for a day, for a week, for an entire unit, for just one little activity forever? What would that look like? And would it even work? I wasn't sure, but I had to find out. And so as I started trying to figure that out, what I really wanted was a formula, something that I could follow step by step, where I would get good results every time. And as I started to think about that, I realized that there's already one career where they rely on a formula very much like that. That's the way that scientists do their work. So I started to think, maybe being a teacher is a lot like being a scientist, at least in some ways, Safety first. And so started thinking about how scientists do their work. They rely on the scientific method. And they start with a hypothesis, and then they test it out. And then they look at the results. And if the results are positive, then great. They have a new way of seeing the world, a new strategy on how they do their work. But if the results are negative, it's not a failure if you learn from it. With scientists, it's not a failure if you learn from it. See, failure is when you throw up your hands and you just give up. But if you can take that data and learn from it and improve, that's progress. And so all of a sudden, I started to see my job a little bit differently. That if I could collect those results and then use them like a scientist, maybe that could move me forward. And so one of my first attempts at that, one of my first experiments, so to speak, came in my Spanish 1 class while we were studying clothing vocabulary. And then it dawned on me, there was this missing piece of that lesson that could bring it some life, props. So right before school, I ran to my closet and I started grabbing all of these clothes that were on my vocabulary list. And then I did something dangerous. I went into my wife's dresser and I started pulling out a bunch of her clothes. I scooped them all up, I stuck them in a suitcase, and I took them off to school. When class started, we started practicing our vocabulary words just to get warmed up. And then I grabbed the suitcase, unzipped it. All my students are going, "What's in that suitcase? What is he doing?" And so what I did was, whenever I called out a word in Spanish, I would say, not when I called out a word, I would say in Espanol, and I would pick something out of my suitcase. And then my students would call it out in Spanish. So I started with something simple. A scarf. Then I added a tie that was already tied. Then a hat. And then things got interesting because I pulled out one of my wife's long skirts. As I did it, I looked up at my students and they snickered at me, but they kept their eyes glued on me, watching to see if one of their teachers was really, truly willing to put on a skirt in front of them. And in that moment, I realized that if I wanted to teach more like a scientist and gather results, I had the results I was looking for. The results were in my students' eyes. Every eye was watching this lesson. It was in the still silence that you hear whenever you know that your students are completely engaged. It was in those little half smiles of curiosity that they had on their faces. See, not all of the results that we gather as teachers show up in our grade books or in our standardized tests. So about that skirt, I did finally put it on. Here's the thing. Right as I got my skirt into place, I thought I saw somebody walk by the door of my classroom. I was pretty sure that it was my principal, Mr. Strickland. He was a well-loved principal who was known for running a tight ship. Mr. Strickland could have just kept on walking past my class. He could have called me down to his office later and told me to quit my monkey business and just teach. But instead, when he was in the hallway, Mr. Strickland got 2 steps past my class, turned around, and walked right in, staring me eye to eye. I was speechless. Mr. Strickland crossed his arms and he goes, "You know, Mr. Miller, I think this is great. This is the kind of thing those kids will remember, and this is what's going to make you a great teacher." I heard that and I went, oh. And in that moment, Mr. Strickland didn't realize it, but in that moment, he had just changed the way that I would teach forever. This is where it gets weird and I take the skirt off in front of you. Okay, that's better. Mr. Strickland had just changed the way that I would teach forever. And all of a sudden, I started looking for experiments that I could do all over the place. Whenever I had positive results, it just encouraged me to do bigger and better things. But when the results were negative, it's not a failure if you learn something from it. It's just data to do it better next time. And so in my next experiment, that encouraged me, all of those positive results encouraged me to try something bigger and bolder. Conversational Spanish with no textbooks. So here's how it looked. You'd come into the Spanish classroom, we'd sit down, we'd pick out a handful of vocabulary words to practice that day. And my students and I would tell a story. We'd make up a story using those words as much as we could. And the students were the stars of the story. And when we were finished, I would ask the students to retell that story in their own words in Spanish. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but it turns out that that activity is a very brain-friendly activity that's backed up by cognitive science research. It's this idea of retrieval. And here's the way that retrieval works. Retrieval says that your studying and learning time are more effective if you retrieve information out of your brain instead of trying to cram it back into your brain. Case in point, whenever we ask students to get ready for something like a quiz or a test, what do we ask them to do? We ask them to study, right? Go back over the material, reread the notes. But research tells us that retrieval, or doing a brain dump, where you just recall everything that you can about the topic you want to study, that brain dump is far more effective for long-term memory than standard studying. I really believe in the power of this cognitive science stuff. And it turns out that retrieval in particular has been at work in my life and in your life and in all of our lives for a long time. So think about it. The place where you see that probably most often is music. So think about it. You're driving along in your car, you're listening to the radio, and you hear a song, this one song, come on like every other day, or like every day, or with some radio stations like every hour, you know? That's retrieval. You're hearing it, you're getting those repetitions over and over again, especially when we try to sing along with the lyrics. Whether we know the lyrics or not, we try to sing along with them. That's retrieval. And so I want to do a little experiment with us real quick. In a moment, I'm going to play a song over the speakers here, over your speakers, that I'm convinced that the vast majority of you watching probably know the words to. And I'm going to encourage you to sing along with the lyrics while they're playing on your speakers. Yes, I'm really asking you to do this, to sing along wherever it is that you're watching this. So we're going to sing along with the lyrics, and then when the chorus hits, the music is going to stop. And because of retrieval practice throughout our entire lives, we're going to sing the lyrics to the chorus all together, but separately in our own places, but all together by heart. Okay? You ready for this? Here we go. There it is. Says we gotta hold on to what we've got. It doesn't make a difference if we make it or not. We got each other. That's all I for love. We'll give it a shot. Here we go. Oh, we're halfway there. Oh, living on a prayer. Take my hand and we'll make it, I swear. Oh, living on a prayer. And how many of you went, living on a prayer? Go ahead, give yourselves a round of applause. That was really good. You didn't know we were going to do karaoke today, did you? See, I'm all full of surprises. Now, it turns out that the students in my Spanish classes were learning Spanish the same way that we learn lyrics. And that's the power of brain science, is that whenever we understand the way that the brain learns and prefers, we can learn smarter instead of harder. And are we back? Oh, my batteries are almost dead. Hang on just a second. Let's just switch it to the... Okay, we're going to test and see if that, sorry about the microphone issues. We're going to test and see if that one works. I'm going to wait for John to give me a text to make sure that he can hear us okay. You guys can drop it in the chat. But the truth is that John's probably going to get it faster. Okay, he gave me the thumbs up. All right, so as I was saying, that's the idea behind the whole teacher is scientist idea, is that we can gather all sorts of results, right? And we can use those results to propel us forward. And whenever we feel like we have something that's a failure, it's not a failure if we learn something from it, right? Now, before we go on, I wanted to tell you that if you are looking for lots of practical ways to implement some of this stuff, I have something for you. I have this free ebook that's available on my website, and it's called 101 Practical Ways to Ditch That Textbook. It's got lots of plug and play things ready to use in your classroom that use technology, creativity, innovation, stuff like that. And actually, there are a couple of other free ebooks that go with it, including lots of templates you can download and assign right to your students. Now, if you're looking at all of that stuff and you're thinking, that's some pretty good stuff. Where can I get Matt's stuff? If you look on your screen, that's where you can get it right there. I promise this is a real thing. So if you go to getmattstuff.com and you put in your email address and your name, it's going to send all of that great stuff to you. It'll also sign you up for my email newsletter, which has lots of practical teaching ideas you can use in class right away, every single week. So I was starting to see how being a teacher was a lot like being a scientist, but it still felt sort of incomplete. You know, you think of science, and a lot of times you use the term art and science. You know, art and science, it's kind of like the yin and the yang, like they kind of complete each other, right? So I started to think, I wonder if being a teacher is kind of like an artist too, in some ways. And of course, for me, my mind immediately goes to woodworking. You know, that's kind of been my artistic outlet my entire life. And so I started to think, I wonder if there are some parallels between being a teacher and being a woodworker. And the more that I looked at it, the more I realized that there were lots of parallels. Because you see, with a woodworker, a lot of times with a woodworker, you think of hammer and nails and wood and drills and all of that stuff, right? But a woodworker doesn't really start with that. A woodworker starts with a dream. A woodworker starts with a dream. See, she envisions something that doesn't exist in this world, or at least in her house. And she goes, I bet I could build that. Yeah, I don't need to order that desk from Amazon. I'm going to build it today. Well, maybe tomorrow. but definitely faster than Amazon Prime can get it to my house. And she tells other people about her dream. And they might tell her that she's brave or ambitious or bold. Some of them might even tell her that she's a little bit crazy. But you know what? It doesn't matter what they think. What they think doesn't determine whether she pursues her dream or not, right? My wife and I are dreamers. I met her whenever I was in college, and pretty quickly I knew that she was the one. We love to talk about our future together. And one of our favorite topics on that was our dream house. And we would constantly be asking, you know, where do you think it's going to be? What do you think it's going to look like? What kind of cool features is it going to have? And like two young kids in love, you know what we did with our dream? We drew a picture of it. And so right there on the screen, you can see there's the picture that we drew. And so you can see there's the house and the happy little family in front of it, shade tree off to the side. So a place for horses in the back and a batting cage and a place for me to hit golf balls. Never hurts to dream, right? Now there was one part of this drawing that I never totally understood. See, we never have had any plans of leaving Indiana where we live right now. So I'm not exactly sure where those mountains came from in the background. They just popped up out of the ground in the background in Indiana. I don't know. But if you look in the top right-hand corner of that drawing, you'll see a date, March 5th, 2001. We had no idea if we were going to be able to bring that dream into reality, but we at least wanted to give it a try. And so we got married and we started saving some money as best as we could. Then we became teachers. You know the punchline to that joke, right? Savings drastically reduced. And then we had kids. Savings totally destroyed. And at that point, we started thinking, you know, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see that dream that we've held in our minds for so long. But slowly we were able to start putting some money together and save some until we were able to buy a little bit of property. And all of a sudden our dream slowly started to take shape. The build started and we started to actually see it come together. We went to building materials auctions to try to save a little bit of money. We recruited family and friends to help us out, and we paid them with pizza because that's about all we could pay them with. And after all of those years, 14 years and 9 months to be specific, that plan that we had of our dreams turned into our dream house. Actually, that's where I'm doing this presentation from, is from that very house. And see, when I think back on that story, I can't help but think of how similar it is of what we do in the classroom in teaching. You know, teaching very much is dream work. Because you see, to build our dreams into reality in the classroom, we don't need contractors and, you know, expensive materials and lots of money. Well, you do for some of it, but not a lot of it. The best stuff we can dream up and we can bring into reality with construction paper or pipe cleaners or Google Docs or Flipgrid videos. And see, the best stuff is the stuff that doesn't cost anything, and the currency is our students' imagination. It's dream work. And so let me ask you this. Are you dreaming? Are you dreaming? Are you dreaming those dreams about what your class and your lessons might look like? And then here's the follow-up question. Are you taking your dreams seriously? Are you actually taking them seriously? Because your best dreams don't have an opportunity to change your students' lives if you don't give them the chance
to even breathe. So the work we do as teachers is all about dreams, right? But dreaming is hard work. No, it's best not to do it alone. In fact, it's best to do it with your person or with your people. Do you know who your person or your person is or your people are? They might be right there with you. They might be right down the hallway whenever you're in your classroom like normal, you know? For me, all my life, whenever I've done woodworking projects, my person has always been my dad. You know, we've done these woodworking projects together my entire life, from when I was really little and we did pine wood derby cars for Cub Scouts, all the way up to adulthood, where now we'll make benches and shelves and decks. And I have learned that my best projects have come whenever I bring my plans to my dad and he takes a look at them. Or even better, when we put those plans together. Because my dad sees things differently than I do. See, I'll look at a project and I'll go, oh man, it would be really cool if we put a shelf here and here and here. And my dad will look at it and he'll go, yeah, that would be really cool. But the way the plans are right now, it's not quite going to fit because you're not adjusting for the width of the wood. But if we make some changes right now, we could totally do that. And then I'll look at it and I'll go, yeah, and you know what else I want to do? I want to put some wainscot behind it to make it look really nice. And my dad will look at it and he'll go, yeah, that will look really nice. But here's the thing about wainscot, is that it comes in one size sheet and you're going to need 2 sheets. So you got to think about where that seam is going to go. All of my projects have been better, like I said earlier, because my dad and I did them together. There's this saying, is that if you want to go far, let me do that again. There's this saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. See, whenever we envision our class and whenever we plan lessons and all of that, so often we just lock ourselves up in our own classroom and we just plan all by ourselves. And whenever we do that, we're limiting our students. Think about it this way. Whenever we plan by ourselves, we're limiting our students to one brain's worth of ideas, just what one brain can come up with. So when we work by ourselves, we become the limiting factor. We're the limiting factor. But it doesn't have to be that way. See, whenever we reach out to other people down the hall or in our department or through a professional learning network on Twitter or whatever, we start to expose our students to the brilliance of other people's minds. There's more people, there's more brains involved in it. Whenever you ask somebody else, hey, what do you think about this? Or what else does this need? Or what would you do differently with this? See, whenever you start to do that, you're no longer the limiting factor. You become the empowering factor whenever you collaborate, because you allow your students to see more, do more, experience more because of the wealth of all of those other people's ideas. Don't be the limiting factor. Be the empowering factor. So this is all starting to come together a little bit. You know, being a teacher in many ways was like being a scientist. It was also kind of like being a woodworker too, you know? So I started looking at that, art and science, science and art, and I thought, this is making sense, but there is this sort of X factor that so many of the great teachers that I know have. And sure, they've got the art and they've got the science, but there's something else about them that makes them really great that can't be explained with just art and science. And I started thinking about it. And it all came a little bit more clear to me when I saw this one movie that was popular in the 80s. It was a movie about fighter pilots. Have you seen it before? Here it comes. Do it again. Come on, I want to hear it.
I'm trying.
We're going to get it in just a second. There it is. All right. Here we go. Hang on a second. I got one more piece here. Yes. There we go. So you lose some of your cool points when you have to take your glasses off to put your sunglasses on. There we go. All right, so on your screen, you see Pete Mitchell, call sign Maverick. Maverick was invited to go to Top Gun, which was the school for the elite pilots in the US Navy to learn combat techniques in the air. Maverick was a little bit of a risk taker, and it rubbed some of his colleagues and some of his instructors the wrong way. For instance, there was one particular mission that he flew, a practice mission against one of his instructors, Jester. See, Jester was coming up behind Maverick and was in the perfect position to take him down. No matter what Maverick did to try to beat Jester, he couldn't do it until he finally decided to take a risk. He said, it's one of those iconic moments from the movie. He says, I'll hit the brakes and he'll fly right by me. So Maverick hits the brakes and there goes Jester. Maverick was in perfect position. Jester kind of flies out of bounds. Maverick follows him down where he's not supposed to, and he gets a shot and he gets Jester. When he gets on the ground, Maverick got chewed out pretty bad for breaking protocol and going down too low to get Jester. But his instructors knew that they had seen brilliance. Because you see, Maverick had this improvisational, creative way of flying that his colleagues didn't have. Maverick was willing to take a risk whenever the potential rewards of the risk were huge. And see, that's where I start to see the similarities between the work that we do as educators and Maverick, is that we have to be willing to take some instructional risks when the potential rewards are huge. I want to introduce you to someone real quick. On your screen, you're going to see my friend Gina Ruffcorn. She's a 5th grade teacher in Iowa. And years ago, Gina heard about this one kind of activity called Mystery Skype that you could do in your classroom. I'm curious to see in the chat if anybody's familiar with Mystery Skype, if you've ever done one or anything like that. So Gina hears about it. And here's the idea in case you're not familiar. A Mystery Skype is this global guessing game where you have one class on a video call, like a Skype call, with another class. And so they can see each other on this call. One class sees the other one can see the one, and they see each other's smiling faces. Neither class has any idea where the other one is located geographically. And so it's their job to ask yes and no questions about their location, to narrow it down until they can guess where that other class is. Gina was looking at this and she was like, this is so cool. I'm totally going to do this. So she finds another teacher to do a mystery Skype call with. And so they get onto the call and they start to play this mystery Skype game, trying to guess each other's location. How can I put this politely? Gina's class got destroyed by the other class. Like, the other class guessed Gina's location so fast, and Gina's kids really struggled with it. And so as the call was wrapping up, Gina was walking back towards her computer to hang up the Skype call. And you know how in about 2 seconds time, you can have roughly 947 different thoughts fly through your mind? That's what was happening to Gina at the moment. She's walking back to her computer and she's going, oh my goodness, that was so bad. That was so bad. That was embarrassing. I can't believe that happened. I am never doing that again. She hangs up the call and she turns around and they're her students. And before she could take a breath, Gina's students look at her and they go, Ms. Ruffcorn, that was And so here's Gina. She's got excited kids about doing it again, but she doesn't want to do it a bit. So she had a decision to make. As you can maybe guess, Gina decided to side with her students and do another mystery Skype call. Today, Gina has done more than 500 mystery Skype calls with fifth graders in her class in Iowa, with people all over the world. They've done these calls with, people in different countries and different cities and states around the United States. And her kids in tiny rural Iowa have a much bigger worldview and have much more perspective about the world because Gina was willing to take that risk. She was willing to try something. And even when it didn't go well, she used her results as data, got better, and it ended up being great. And none of it would have happened if she wasn't willing to take a risk. Now, taking risks with technology, this isn't something that's like brand new. This didn't just happen with the invention of Chromebooks and iPads. We've been taking risks, instructional risks in the classroom with technology for a while. Case in point, my beloved Apple IIgs computer. Do you guys remember this one? The Apple IIgs computer? Okay, so I want to ask something, and if you can answer this in the chat, that would be awesome. So here's what I want to know. I want you to let me know if you were one of those students that went down to the magical computer lab that was full of computers like these, similar to these or these exact ones. Or I want you to tell me if you were a teacher and you led those students down to those computer labs with all of those computers. And of course, the best part about these computers was the educational games you could play on them. So you had things like number munchers. This was the one where you had to jump on the correct answer to the math problem with a little monster. Reader Rabbit taught us to read and spell. And of course, everybody wanted to know, where in the world is, could you do it? Carmen Sandiego. There was another one I like called Odell Lake. This was where you were a fish in the lake and your job was to not die, to not get eaten by the other marine life. Now, after talking about all of these, we know that there is one that holds a very near and dear place in our hearts that I haven't mentioned, right? So I want you to type it or say it out loud at the top of your lungs on the count of 3 to let me know you know what I'm talking about, okay? Because you know what I'm talking about. You ready? On the count of 3, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Oregon Trail. That's right. Oregon Trail. I mean, think about it. It was the best, right? Pioneer life in the mid-1880s. Crossing the wilderness in a covered wagon. I mean, you are bartering, you're fording rivers, you're trying to shoot wildlife, which is your space bar and your arrow keys. You remember this? And I learned a lot of very valuable life lessons from the Oregon Trail. Like, I learned about some diseases I didn't know about, like cholera. Marge has cholera. Don't want to get that. And then what's the disease that's most synonymous with Oregon Trail? What's the one that everybody hears of? Dysentery, right? You can die from dysentery. Don't want to get that. But if you think about it, teaching with these games like Oregon Trail, this was a little bit of an instructional risk, wasn't it? I mean, back in the 80s, teaching with video games, this was sort of unheard of, But the teachers that did it, they had this, they had this advantage. Whenever kids would play these games, it was almost like they'd get it into this flow state where they would lose track of space and time around them because they were totally focused in. So what seemed like it might have been risky had enormous potential rewards. So if you start to think back through Some of the things we've talked about so far. Some of them might seem a little bit risky, you know? I mean, think about it. I taught Spanish by putting on a bunch of ridiculous clothes. Gina played a mystery Skype game that she had never tried before. And some of these teachers taught with video games in the 80s when that was unheard of. Risky. I want us to reframe that word risky. Let's think about that for just a second. So to reframe it, let's start with what we know as safe. Let's think about safe. What does safe teaching look like? You know, to me, for the longest time, safe teaching has looked like direct instruction in front of the class. You know, makes me feel safe, comfortable. Teachers have done this for years, not gonna rock the boat. But when my lectures wouldn't engage my students, let's be honest, my lectures very rarely engage my students. Do you remember when they ran for the door? Immediately, they would turn their attention switch to off. And when my students would turn their attention switch to off, they might as well have been someplace else. I mean, think about how much learning was actually going on there. It felt safe to me, but it clearly wasn't getting results. So let's think about, is that how we want to define risky teaching? Like, I've done it before, others have done it before. It's not getting the results that we want, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway. That doesn't sound like safe teaching to me. That sounds like risky teaching. Okay, so if safe teaching is risky teaching, what if we turned it around? Could risky teaching actually be safe teaching? Let's think about it. We have an idea that we want to try. We're not sure exactly how it's going to go, which is what makes it feel risky. You know, we're nervous. We're not sure if we want to try it, but it has huge potential rewards. We try it out. And if it doesn't go so well, it's not a failure if you learn from it. It's just data, right? But if it does go well, all of a sudden we have something that is leaps and bounds better than the ordinary. All of a sudden we have a class that kids want to come to, that beats the boredom of business as usual. All of a sudden I'm thinking that risky teaching doesn't look so risky anymore, right? Maybe risky teaching is one of the safest things that we can do. Let me say that one more time. Risky teaching may be one of the safest things we can do. So we're starting to get a picture of how this all looks, right? Teaching like a scientist, you know, gathering all sorts of results. Teaching like a woodworker and building our dreams into reality. Teaching like a maverick fighter pilot and taking some instructional risks. Now, before we teach like this, I think there's an important question that we have to ask ourselves. Why? Why do we wouldn't want to do it? I mean, for goodness sake, wouldn't it just be easier to teach to the table of contents of our textbooks? Easier? Oh yeah, it would definitely be easier. But that kind of textbook teaching doesn't give us something that this woodworker, scientist, maverick type of teaching that we've been talking about give us. And that is permission. All of this we've been talking about today leads to permission. You know, when you connect with the heart and soul of your students, all of a sudden they give you permission to come into their lives and to influence them and to help them to make smart choices and help them to see how bright their future is. I want you to think for just a second about a student, a special student that you've worked with, someone that you've seen go on a long journey to improvement, someone that you've seen make great strides, great gains. Do you have a student picked out? Okay, I want you to hold that student in your mind for just a second, because I want to tell you about one of mine. Let's call him Marcus. So it was 2012, right at the beginning of the school year. I'd come into my classroom to check out my rosters, to see the unique personality that each class was going to have. I saw Marcus's name on my roster. Marcus was one of those kids whose reputation preceded him. He frustrated his teachers, failed to do his work, battled with his teachers. It was just a battle all the time with Marcus. And I was preparing myself for a rocky year. So I started the school year, and I was very much trying to play the teacher scientist, trying different things and gathering results. I was playing the lesson woodworker, dreaming big dreams and trying to bring them into reality. I was being the maverick teacher, taking some instructional risks. And this kind of teaching seemed to really connect with Marcus. It was like he was in his element. He was able to come up with fun characters and funny plot twists for our stories in Spanish that nobody else would ever think of. He was like in his place, And it turned out that Marcus wasn't the problem that I had heard so much about from other teachers. Between classes, sometimes Marcus and I would, chat out in the hallway. And it turns out that he had really diverse interests outside of school. Like he would raise geckos, and he would tell me all about these geckos and their mannerisms and their diets and the different kinds. Marcus would race four-wheelers and races all over the United States. And we even got to talk every once in a while about how he could take his interests and turn them into a career later. Marcus was one of those kids where, despite his grades, you knew he was going to be just fine out in the real world. The last year that I had Marcus in class was a tough one for him. His mom had developed cancer, and it spread really rapidly. They told us that the cancer was terminal, but we thought, she's such a fighter. She might just beat this cancer, refusing to let it take her life. But it turned out that Marcus's junior year of high school, his mom lost her battle to cancer. He was in and out of school a lot that year. I didn't get to see him as much as I did or get to talk to him as much as I did before. But whenever he was in my class, I could still see that spark, and I could still see that he was in his element. I know that Marcus woke up in the morning and it was tough for him knowing that his mom just wasn't there. And then he had to come into school and he had to battle with his teachers all day long. But then he got to come to my class and he got to be himself, and he got to escape from it for just a little while. I wanted to create this sanctuary for Marcus, this refuge where he could come and he could leave some of that stuff behind. Impact. That's why we do it. Impact. We get to have an impact on students every single day, whether we realize it or not. Think back to that student that you held in your mind that we talked about earlier. Think about that student. And I want you to think about the impact that you may have had on that student. Now, I want you to realize a couple of things. Number one, the amount of impact you think you had on that student probably pales in comparison to the amount of actual impact that you had on them. And the other thing I want you to realize is that that's just one student. See, being a teacher, we get to have this enormous ripple effect on our students. And it's an effect that I don't think we will ever be able to see the full reach of. For instance, Whenever you talk to that one student who's really struggling with his spelling words and you tell him, you know what, stick with it. You can do this, you got it. That lesson in perseverance might stick. And as he grows up, who knows how far that perseverance might take him. And then you talk to that other student, you know, that girl with the kind of quirky personality, and you tell her, you know what, you be you. That's who you are. Stick to that. Be true to yourself. That lesson in confidence may stick. And as she grows up, who knows how far that could take her. And then you talk to that other girl who's kind of excited about computer science, but is afraid that it's nerdy. And you say, you know what? Who cares if it's nerdy? We need girls in computer science, and we need you in computer science. So you go for it. You know, that spark of passion may stick. And as she grows up, who knows how far that could take her. Don't you see? All of this enormous impact all comes from just one teacher. All of this huge, huge, enormous impact all comes from one teacher, you. And in many of those interactions, you may not realize it, but through those teeny tiny interactions, you're spreading your legacy. And it all starts with one teacher. And if we were in person together, I would say, you know what? Look around. Because all of that huge impact, if it comes from one teacher, we are surrounded by lots of just one teacher, a whole room of just one teacher. If you want to make a huge impact on a community, a state, a country, or even the world, I think the best place to start is in a room full of teachers. So at the beginning of this, I was telling you how I was looking for a formula, right? Something that I could follow every single time to get results. I think we have our formula. Gather results and learn from them like a scientist. Dream big dreams and bring them into reality like a woodworker. Be a maverick fighter pilot and be willing to take some instructional risks. That kind of teaching leads to permission. Permission leads to impact. And when you get impact, you start to change lives. Start to change lives, and that helps you start to change the world a little bit. I don't think it's overstating to say that our work is world-changing work. And I know that it's not overstating to say that it's life-changing work. Teach well, make an impact, change the world. I'm excited to see the impact that you're going to have in your classroom in this coming year. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm going to be in on those couple of breakout sessions right after this. Can't wait to see you there. Thanks.